This episode is brought to you by Patriot Gold Group. Protect your retirement assets and your future. Speak to the experts at Patriot Gold. They've been the top-rated gold IRA dealer for 7 years in a row. That's a lot of years in a row. Go to patriotgoldgroup.com or call 1-888-621-3856 for a free investor guide. It's Friday, 5 July. Welcome to the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. Let's get briefed. First, we'll bring you the results of the UK's historic election, which saw unprecedented gains for Labour as the Conservative Party suffered what could be described as political obliteration. Also, Israel is sending another delegation back to the negotiating table with Hamas after senior officials indicated a major breakthrough in the stalled ceasefire negotiations with the Iranian-backed militants. But first, our afternoon spotlight. I want to begin in the UK, where in last night's election, Labour swept Parliament in an unprecedented landslide victory, while the ruling Conservative Party was trounced in their worst electoral performance in their 190-year history. The now former Conservative Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had scheduled the elections far earlier than expected, hoping recent improvements in economic data could help him close the gap with Labour among the country's dissatisfied voters. But the gamble failed spectacularly. With almost all districts counted, Labour won more than 412 seats in the 650-seat parliament. That's an increase of 211, giving them power for the first time in 14 years, along with one of the largest majorities ever seen in Britain's parliament. The last time Labour saw anything close to Thursday's results was Tony Blair's insurgent victory all the way back in 1997. On the Conservative side, well, it was a total bloodbath. The party secured just 112 seats in Parliament while losing 250 lawmakers, including a record number of senior ministers, as well as former Prime Minister Liz Truss. With just 24% of the popular vote, it was the worst election in the party's history, and it ended 14 years of uninterrupted Conservative rule in the UK. In a very interesting wrinkle, much of the damage was dealt from within the larger Conservative movement. Populist leader Nigel Farage, the former Brexit champion, entered the race just a month ago to the shock of many, particularly to leaders of the ruling Conservative Party. He led the right-wing Reform UK party in the election, which advocates for a Trump-style crackdown on immigration. And that's according to a report from the Wall Street Journal. That issue has fractured the Conservative Party in recent years, allowing Farage to begin building an alternative right-wing coalition. Now, Farage comfortably won a seat in Parliament, while netting Reform UK 5 seats. While that's a paltry figure compared with Labour and the Conservatives, it was an impressive showing for the relatively young political party. Notably, they managed to secure 14% of the popular vote. Farage intends to use this momentum to siphon off more members of the Conservative Party and build a new right-wing voting bloc within Parliament. He said Friday, quote, "My plan is to build a mass national movement over the course of the next few years and hopefully be big enough to challenge the general election properly in 2029. Believe me, folks," he said, "this is just the first step of something that is going to stun all of you," end quote. Following the historic defeat, Rishi Sunak resigned Friday morning, handing power to Labour leader Keir Starmer. After being officially sworn in as Prime Minister and meeting with King Charles III, in keeping with long-standing British tradition, Starmer addressed the nation in a speech outside Downing Street. Starmer promised a wave of reforms to address the overall economy and the country's cost of living crisis, but stressed that any changes would take time and patience on behalf of the public. Now, it's worth mentioning that Starmer has an uphill battle when it comes to winning over the public. Despite the historic margins in Parliament, Labour only secured 34% of the popular vote, as some 40% of UK voters opted to choose smaller parties. The nation also saw a historic low in voter participation, with just 60% of registered voters taking part in Thursday's election. It's a reflection of the deep distrust for the current political elites within the UK, where trust in politicians across parties, well, it sits at record lows. Many analysts say that voters were largely casting a ballot against the Conservative Party, but are likely still skeptical of Labour as well. The new prime minister said, quote, "This lack of trust can only be healed by actions, not words. I know that. Whether you voted Labour or not, in fact, especially if you did not, I say to you directly, my government will serve you. Politics can be a force for good, and we will show that," end quote. Well, the reality is, Starmer and the Labour Party won a decisive victory more because of frustration and dissatisfaction with the Conservatives than because of love or loyalty for Labour. This was essentially a throw-the-bums-out election, and Labour will likely have a relatively short time frame to show the public that they can improve key areas of concern: the economy, a dysfunctional healthcare system, severe budget shortfalls, and other pressing problems that may require more time to fix than the public has an appetite for. And if so, the next bums to be tossed out, well, will be Labour. All right, coming up after the break, the stalled ceasefire negotiations in Gaza may get a lifeline after reports emerge that Hamas has significantly adjusted their position. I'll be right back. Welcome back to the Afternoon Bulletin. It looks like mediators in the Middle East could possibly salvage a Gaza ceasefire deal as U.S. and Israeli officials signal a major breakthrough in negotiations. It's unclear yet what the details of this breakthrough may look like, but they concern the Israeli-backed ceasefire proposal that was put on the table at the end of May. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu told President Biden on Thursday that Israel will send a delegation to resume stalled negotiations in the coming days, raising hopes that this time a deal might be struck. That's according to a report from Reuters. The surprise development came after Hamas, seemingly out of nowhere, significantly adjusted their position regarding a hostage and prisoner swap, at least according to the anonymous reports. A source in the Israeli negotiating team told Reuters, quote, "The proposal put forward by Hamas includes a very significant breakthrough. There's a deal with a real chance of implementation," end quote. Both Israeli and U.S. officials stressed, however, that there were still outstanding issues and that negotiations would likely take some time. Still, the unexpected turnabout is an encouraging sign. An anonymous U.S. official told Reuters, quote, "We do believe there is a pretty significant opening here, and we welcome the Prime Minister's readiness to try to seize that opening by empowering his negotiating team to engage directly in Doha over the coming days," end quote. As you'll likely recall, the latest ceasefire negotiations have been rather tumultuous. It's an understatement, ever since Biden announced the Israeli proposal in a speech in late May. The three-phase ceasefire proposal calls for an immediate pause in fighting and the full withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza in the first stage. And that stage would also see the release of all the remaining hostages being held in Gaza in exchange for a large number of Palestinian prisoners. The second phase would call for Israel and Hamas to negotiate a permanent ceasefire, and if these negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, the temporary ceasefire would be extended. And then a third stage outlines plans for a multi-year reconstruction effort in the war-torn enclave. Well, Netanyahu has always maintained that Israel will not agree to a permanent ceasefire until Hamas has been defeated. He gave assurances to senior U.S. officials in early June that Israel would accept and implement the first phase of the current ceasefire proposal. Hopes for an imminent deal were dashed, however, back on June 11th, after Hamas demanded several amendments to the ceasefire proposal, many of which U.S. officials and others said were extreme and unworkable, and that Israeli officials said amounted to essentially a rejection. Among other things, the militant group wanted a deal that forced Israel into a permanent ceasefire in the first stage of a truce agreement. Now, we'll bring you more details on the specifics of this possible new deal as information becomes available. And that, my friends, is the PDB Afternoon Bulletin for Friday, 5 July. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And remember, if you want to listen to this show ad-free, be sure to check out our premium membership at pdbpremium.com. And, of course, as if you didn't know and hadn't already marked it on your calendar, another new episode of our PDB Situation Report drops this evening at 10 p.m. on the First TV. We've got two terrific guests for this weekend's show, Ryan Macbeth and Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer. We're talking Ukraine, weapons systems that are having an impact in that conflict, ISIS-K, and possible cooperation between the U.S. government and the Taliban. Not to mention, I'll show you how to make a decorative centerpiece out of classified documents, and we're mixing up some tasty summertime cocktails. Okay, we aren't doing that last part, but we do have great guests, news, and insight that will help you impress your friends with your keen understanding of global developments. I'm Mike Baker. I'll be back on Monday. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.